Hi everyone, my name's Jacob from Rich and McMunn's publishing team. Welcome to this new module, Getting Started with Writing a Novel. In this module, we're going to be covering the 5 main points in writing a novel. These are the 5 key parts of your novel that you'll need to include and you need to consider quite carefully. These are plot, setting, characters, themes, and ending. So we're going to get started with the plot. The plot is the narrative of your book and the actions that will take place. This is the story, if you will. We're going to start with method 1, which is writing it out. Have you ever read a Wikipedia synopsis of a book? It's essentially 6 or 7 short paragraphs which explain the main events of the story as well as the end result. I think this is a great way to start with working out your story. If you have a good idea, write it down in the synopsis format. This is much harder than you think though. You'll really want to put in all the small details of the story, and the first 1 or 2 attempts at this will probably be close to 15 paragraphs. But you need to be really ruthless. You need to summarize the plot before you can start writing. Once you have slimmed down your synopsis, give it to a friend to check over, or, better yet, give it to a few friends to check over. The second method is the snowflake method. So start off by summarizing your work in a single sentence. This is a great selling exercise. Don't mention any names, keep it short and to the point. Imagine if you were trying to sell your book to an agent or publisher in one line, what would you say? Some people refer to this as the elevator pitch, something that you could tell someone in the space of one lift ride. For example, it could be something like, a British taxi driver finds a dead body and is drawn into a world of drink, drugs and debauchery. Next, you want to expand on the opening line by trying to write a single paragraph that summarizes the book. This should describe the start of your book, middle of your book, and the end of your book in brief. Follow this up by expanding again, now to 4 paragraphs. Finally, expand this to an entire page. You can take more steps, such as fleshing out your characters, but we'll cover them in the next section. The third method is the chapter by chapter outline. This is kind of a mix or a crossbreed of the first 2 methods. In this method, you take each chapter and summarize it in a single paragraph. Once again, make sure you focus on brevity and keeping the paragraph short and simple. Focus on the main events of the chapter. Once you've done this, go back over the smaller paragraphs and add minor touches, such as how things happened and why they happened. Then you need to get someone to proofread it. I cannot emphasize this point enough. You need to make sure that your plot makes sense before writing it. There are of course many other methods. Everyone has their own ways of planning, and they may even use the above ways with a slightly different format. Whichever way you use, make sure that your plot is planned thoroughly. So the second of the 5 main key features in your novel is setting. The setting of your novel is extremely important. It makes an enormous difference to how successful the book is. There are some really big things to take into consideration with setting. I can't tell you where to set your book, but I can give you some advice on how to choose. The biggest piece of advice is to write about somewhere that you know. Why is this? Because only by knowing your own setting will you be able to make it your own. Think about this. How many thousands of books over the years have written about cities like London, Paris, Berlin, and Vienna? There's romance to cities like these that authors love to try and bring out, but it's been done time and time again. You need to be a bit more creative. By taking your own town, for example Maidstone in Kent, and setting a novel there, you have a chance to do something that nobody's ever done before. You have a chance to describe how you see it, put your stamp on a largely unknown location, and bring it to life for the reader. I think that's invaluable. Furthermore, you will be far more comfortable writing somewhere that you know and have spent time in, and this will come through in the writing. As someone who has attempted to write about places I've never visited, I can tell you that it's much easier to go back to your roots, and your writing will really benefit from this. Of course, there's always the option of making up a location entirely. This is usually reserved for fantasy writers and science fiction writers, but anyone can do it. My best advice if you are taking this method is to use the same planning methods which we discussed in the previous sections. Write everything down about that location, the people, the buildings, the history of the town. It all needs to make sense and have a backstory. It needs to be logical. We'll discover more about this in the next slide. The third key aspect of a successful novel is good characters. You should try and plan everything about your character and know them off by heart. Give them external ambitions, and even a fantasy plot needs grounded, human-feeling characters. Your book will live and die based on how well you've constructed these characters. The characters are the main link between the reader and the story, and therefore it's essential that your reader can connect with them. If not, they'll be left feeling disconnected from the plot and might not finish the story. So, how do you go about creating your characters? The answer is very simple. Plan, plan, plan. In order to create the characters for your story, it pays to go the extra mile. Right now, right this minute, take a pen and think of a character. And we don't just mean think of a character, make them a real human being. For example, Joseph Smith, the painter from Bromley, is just not good enough. What you need to know is everything about Joseph Smith. Write down the names of his parents, his age, his favourite colour, his favourite flavour of juice, where he went to school, what sports team he follows, the size of his feet, his opinion on politics, the car he drives, and so on. Why? Because this is all the basis for Joseph's personality. His character will be made up of the environment that's moulded him. Therefore, these features will reflect on how you write him. We are all a product of our own experiences and characteristics. The biggest mistake you can make is creating characters whose sole purpose is to act as part of the novel. You'll end up with characters who are disingenuous. If you really want to write a character, you need to get inside their head, and to do that you need to know them inside out. Go the extra mile and the results will show. Make sure you give your characters ambition. What drives them? What makes them want to continue, to push forward for greater things? And again, I don't just mean about giving them ambitions relating to the novel. For example, maybe Joseph Smith wants to defeat the evil alien overlord in the sky. And in the context of your book, he might well do this. But he also wants to do the following. He might want to find a partner, settle down, win the lottery. He's not going to do all of those things in the book. But how does that feel for him? How does that impact his behaviour? And how does he react to failed dreams and aspirations? This should all come out subtly in the way that you write him. Now moving on to the fourth of the 5 key components for a successful novel, themes. Your themes have a major impact on the type of story that you tell. You should have one major overarching theme, and you should make sure the reader can read between the lines. Consider mixing up this theme with some other smaller themes to make it more interesting. So, start with one big theme. Even if you're planning to have several themes come out in your work, it's always a great idea to start off with one major premise, which your book will essentially summarise. For example, love conquers all. If this is the main theme that you want to convey in your book, then inevitably your novel will need to take a narrative direction which reflects this. Essentially, it's about making a judgment that a certain attitude or quality will achieve certain results. For example, you could have pride comes before a fall as your main theme, in which case you could have a character who develops excessive pride over the course of the novel, and this eventually leads to his or her downfall. Subtlety and reading between the lines. Of course, there are downsides to having huge themes in your work. There's a danger that your work will come across as gimmicky. Pieces of work which have too many overt messages will be off-putting to a modern-day readership which demands subtlety and intelligence from books. Unless, of course, you're writing a children's book, where simple and moral messages are greatly appreciated. The modern reader wants to be able to read between the lines. So, instead of choosing a simple premise such as love conquers all, you might want to choose some more complex themes. For example, love for others versus self-interest. Now, instead of writing a novel where simply love conquers all, you're contrasting love with self-interested actions. The end result could be the same, but immediately you have a more interesting novel with more complex themes being juxtaposed against each other. And finally, we have the 5th key point which contributes to a successful novel, the ending. Planning your ending is incredibly important. It's the climax of your work and you don't want to waste it. Planning the ending makes every single stage of the novel writing process much easier. You should focus on giving the reader some form of satisfaction or reward for reaching the end of your novel. So we arrive at the ending of your book. You might think it seems a bit strange to plan the ending of your novel before you've even started writing it, but I think this is really important. Essentially, the ending is where all of your work comes to a head and meets its climax, and it's really important you do it right. There is no point writing a fantastic novel if the ending doesn't do the story justice. Having a planned ending means that you, as a writer, have something to aim towards. It makes every stage of the process easier because 1. Your plot is leading towards something, and the events that take place need to make sense in conjunction with the ending, which ties everything together. 2. Your characters are heading towards the end point of the novel, and therefore their actions need to put them in place so they can reach the ending. And finally, the themes of your novel are going to reach a climactic endpoint, where the message that you've been trying to put across to the reader will really come to the forefront. One thing you need to remember when writing your ending is to not annoy the reader. If they've reached the end of your book, then they were obviously committed and interested enough to the work. It's your job to satisfy them. An unsatisfying ending to your novel can leave a bad taste in the reader's mouth. Even if you're intending to leave the book on a cliffhanger, perhaps for a second or third novel, give them something to go with. Make sure that by the end of the book, at least some of the reader's key questions have been answered. There is nothing worse for a reader than reaching the end of the book and realising that they were no less informed than they were at the start. In terms of planning, the ending should be relatively straightforward. Most writers will already have an ending in mind, but if you don't, take some time to study your characters. What is the natural endpoint for Joseph Smith? What are you going to give him, and what are you going to deny him? Remember that whatever you give Joseph Smith or deny him, you're also giving and denying to the reader, who has come with him on his journey. Congratulations, you've reached the end of the module. Thank you for watching.